House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
You are back in the House of Mystery, and we're back this week, and I know you're excited. I'm not, but we got, and yeah, see, that's the laugh of Mr. David Rose Martino.
I'm back as Rose.
Rose, well, it's soft.
Rose.
It's a soft beginning, right?
Yes,
Rose.
That's right.
You get vicious later in the week.
No more serial killer name for the beginning of the year.
Yeah, 3 named serial killers. Well, you will be a good serial killer. You got away with it this long.
I know. No one's found anything.
No one's found anything yet.
Nothing.
Boy, I'll tell you. Boy, all the celebrities dying this last little while. It's just crazy. I'm not going to turn on the TV anymore.
I know.
Yeah, it's
insanity.
Yeah, it's just kind of how it goes. Everyone's turn. Well, anyway, so let's get right to the guest here, because this is an important guest. He's from Seattle, just like me. So that's important. Mr. Glen Erik Hamilton, thank you for being here.
Hello, gentlemen.
Hello. He doesn't know us yet. Gentlemen.
Well, I figured David brought me in to balance the 3 names thing, right?
Well, so, yeah. Look, it's 3 names is
right.
Pretty keen there, I'll tell you, you know. And, you know, Seattle hasn't had a good serial killer in a while, right? It's the Green River. It's been a long time, so it's time. Well, listen, Seattle, you're a trader. You moved away. How come?
I did move away. In the mid-aughts, I'd grown up in Seattle. I'd lived in the area my whole life. Had owned a home and all of that. And we had a couple of seismic changes happen. One was the corporation I was working for got sold to another corporation. And it became a very good time, financially and otherwise, to make a change. I wasn't sure if I wanted to work for the new overlords. And had been with the company for quite a while and was ready for a change anyway. And my wife and I met doing theater locally, and she was working as a professional activist. And we thought, well, what if we moved to California for a while and tried this out? You know, it's a good time for that. And I think it just, in terms of a sea change, it just felt right. And so we loaded up the truck and moved to Beverly, or actually more over the hills from that. And as Bill Murray puts it in Ghostbusters 2, California's beautiful San Fernando Valley. And so we lived in Burbank for about 16 years, and really enjoyed it. We had a child there, and still have the child. We didn't leave her there.
I was going to say.
And I started a writing career, because everybody in LA is an actor. Being an actor down there didn't sound like any fun. And it was something I was just doing for fun. So I started writing for fun and discovered I really enjoyed the work of it. And so I went to the library. I had a chance to take a little time off work before getting another job. Went to the library every day, wrote for a while, discovered, yep, it's really hard to do. And yep, I really enjoy it. So maybe I should learn how to do this. And so I started taking classes and seminars through UCLA Extension and the Writer's Studio there, joined writing groups, took writing classes for a long time, and gradually refined my knowledge of how to write, and then was eventually had kind of a dream situation of getting published, but I don't have to go into that right now. But that's what led us to California. And then what brought us back really was both being ready for another change, with our daughter in middle school looking towards high school, and then all the changes with COVID. With COVID, I started reading the Seattle news a lot more closely than I had been, because of course Seattle was the first place in the U.S. that COVID really hit hard. Right? It was the first place where we saw the refrigerated trucks for the bodies, and because I was writing about a Seattle-based character, it seemed, I was feeling that draw towards my hometown a lot. And it took a while to come together, but middle of last year, we packed up a different truck, and moved back to Seattle, and we're now living in the heart of the city.
Wow. Yeah. Well, there you go. Did you find it, but so you weren't like a writer to begin with, and you've been doing this all your life. It sort of happened when you had another career already, which I find that interesting because I think that takes even more guts, because if you're writing right out of high school and then you start writing for papers and magazines in college, and then you get into doing some short stories and a book and all that, it's kind of a more natural transition. But you're already set in life, so to speak. You're kind of, working and living and house and the whole, you get in the family and doing all this. And all of a sudden you go, well, I want to write. I'm going to write. And it's not easy, so you have to take training and all that stuff. I mean, besides having a great wife who's going to sit home or pay while you out taking these courses and quit your job. I mean,
I still have the day job, just to be clear.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, no, but isn't that kind of scary in a way? Isn't that kind of a jump?
It really is. Although, I went at it with, I like to say my expectations, my aims may be high, but my expectations tend to be kind of low. I got into writing because I always enjoyed writing, and I thought, well, maybe someday I'll try to write a book. I'll try to write the books that I like reading, which are typically mysteries, adventures, thrillers, that sort of thing. That was what I grew up reading. That's what my parents read. That's what I read. And I always thought, well, maybe I'll try my hand at that someday. So when I started writing, it wasn't to say I wasn't with the goal right away of being a published author. The first goal was to figure out if I liked writing. And I did. So I thought, well, let me see if I can tell a story. Let me see if I can write a book. And once the book was written, I was like, well, maybe somebody wants to publish this, right? So there wasn't this 5-year plan to become a published author. It was more about, can I take that next step? Is it in there? And because I still had the day job, had the supportive family, which helps immeasurably, as you mentioned, it was the sort of thing where I had a kind of a releasement from attachment about the outcomes, to put it in Zen Buddhist terminology, right? I wasn't thinking about the outcome. I was thinking about what I was doing. And that both kind of relieved the stress of it, but also made taking that next step possible, because I wasn't aiming for this lofty goal. I was just aiming for the next thing. And I think I still am. I'm not aiming, I don't think I'm aiming for necessarily a big career, although that would be great. I'm aiming for the next book, and the next book has continued to happen and things have continued to grow. But it's always about, what am I doing today, right? What am I writing today, and what am I working on?
So does that come across in your, let's say, your structure of writing? So when you sit down to do a book, and I see you've got, like, the newest book, I believe, is Island of Thieves. Now, this novel is a Man Shaw mystery, book 6. So you're writing a series here. Do you sit down and structure out this whole series? Do you know where your character's starting, your middle and end, and how it's going to end, and then you kind of fill in details, or do you outline, or do you just do it per day? I'm not what they call a pantser, right? A plotter versus pantser. Pantser being the joking seat of the pants, writing by the seat of the pants, right? Every day. I do tend to plot, or at least I have major milestones that I know I'm going to hit in that particular book. Usually it starts with, what do I want the character to undergo during this book, emotionally and otherwise? And then the plot takes some shape and precedence out of that. I don't plot the whole series. I don't know necessarily what Van will discover or what he'll undergo in the next book. Often I'll get the idea for a particular hook into the story, or something that's now, that would be an interesting situation to have him in. How does that fall out?
But I don't have a 10-book plan, 20-book plan for this. It's really about what's the natural evolution from what he just went through in the last book, and how do I. And the fun thing about a series character is you can't have them go through life-changing events in every book, right? Necessarily. If you're going to write a long series, you want readers to be able to pick up a book at any point in the series and have a good time and be introduced to these characters. So there's a certain amount of renewal that also has to come in every time you're writing a new book in the series.
Right. But then with your character, Van Shaw, that you were saying, like, why do you care?
Why do I care what happens to him?
Yeah.
Or why do I care? Why do I care enough to sit down and write another book?
Well, that's kind of both in this question, because in the fact of, like, here you are, and you've created a character called Van Shaw. Now, so this deals with your relationship with that character, because how you feel about Van Shaw is part of the reason why you probably decide to write another book, or think about what the reaction of Van's would be to certain situations. So that's on your mind. So how do you describe a relationship with your main character and you?
Yeah. There's two aspects to that. I really like my main character, obviously, and many of the books, most of the books have been written from the first person perspective. And so there's quite naturally a fair amount of me in him, even though some of it, of course, is wish fulfillment. He's younger, stronger, tougher, quicker with a witticism than I am. But our attitudes are often the same about things. And yet, of course, he's in extreme circumstances, and he's kind of an extreme person as well. And seeing how he'll deal with those things is a fun way of thinking about, how would I want the outcomes of these things to happen? It's a way of pursuing justice too. The real world is very frustrating when it comes to justice. In fiction, we can have an outlet for that, right? We can see injustice in the world, and even though might be having trouble fighting that in the real world, we can fight it on the page, right? We can fight the good fight, hopefully have an outcome that is pleasing to us, or at least is honest. And, when you talk about what brings me back to the series, some of it is seeing injustice around the world or in my local community and thinking, gosh, wouldn't it be nice, right, if we could do something about that directly and make a good story out of it as well.
Well, earlier you mentioned theater. So you've done some acting. Do you think that helped you in creating characters and the novels themselves, the story?
It definitely helps. I think what helps most is one of my degrees was in theater, and so there was a lot of study of plays there and study of dialogue, and that is extremely useful when crafting dialogue that hopefully doesn't sound like recitation. Like characters batting obvious points back and forth, but really thinking about who are these characters as individuals, what do they each want out of this, and is every line that they're saying nudging them towards that, right? And towards what they want and what they're after. And so some of it's the crafting of dialogue that you learn from reading a whole bunch of plays as you're growing up. Some of it's just standing up and reading the words out loud, which is part of my writing process. Is I will print out the pages, I will read them out loud, and that's a great method for understanding whether or not, number one, if the pace is right, because it feels slow as I'm reading it, it's probably slow to the reader. But also whether the dialogue, the voices sound different, and whether it crackles a bit.
You don't do that when you're just walking down the road.
Oh, absolutely. It's a great way to keep people from asking me for fair change. And, no, it's really funny in this day and age. Having people wander down the street muttering to themselves. Now that we're all on earbuds and headsets, it's not that unusual anymore, right? hardly gets a notice. Now, if you're describing a particularly violent scene, that might get the kind of attention you don't want. But, yeah.
Yeah, you might end up in a jail where you don't want to
Right.
be. Well, maybe
Exactly.
you do, right? I mean, it's
With
good
a whole bunch of
experience.
people talking to themselves, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. Pair them up and they're all looking good. But, it's interesting because when you mention how you are in the character, and I guess a lot of writers are in their characters, especially the main character, a lot of them are in it. So that in itself, so when someone takes, how do I say, okay, so you go online, you're in Amazon, and you grab a review and someone's got this, 1 or 2 star, and they pick out a particular element of that character, something that you kind of portrayed quite well, but it's something that they didn't like. And it's something that maybe is personal to you. It's something that you wrote it because this is something you feel, about it, you can explain it well, and it's in your character. So when that happens, does that is that kind of a sore spot for you? Does that bother you?
Well, it's I'll lead off by saying I stay away from the reviews. We talked about having supportive family, and my wife will vet the reviews for me. One lesson learned from theater is, boy, those bad reviews stick with her. You never remember the good ones. You can get a dozen good ones, but you get one bad one, and that bad one sticks in your head, right? Yeah. So I tend to avoid reading reviews that are not from, like, say, Kirkus or Book Reporter or a library journal and so forth, if they're not from one of the majors. But yes, if somebody's pointing out an aspect of Van that they don't like, right? They call him a social justice warrior, or because he's from liberal Seattle,
yeah,
or they don't like the fact that they're swearing in the book. You'll get that as well. That's fine, but it's just an opinion, and you have to let it go. It didn't resonate with that person, and you have to accept that there's a whole lot of people for whom it did resonate, and you move on, right? If you're pleasing everyone, you're probably not writing something very interesting. So,
Jeez, I've been doing
there's
great.
always that.
I'm doing wonderful. I've got a lot of people I'm pleased.
Excellent. You're writing some truth.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's usually what does it, right? It's interesting. So, is there anything that you want people to get out of this book? And just like any of the other books you do, besides the story, is there some sort of subtext, or is there some sort of a meaning that at the end of the book, when they put it down, that you hope that they understood?
I don't generally write with meaning in mind. Sometimes there's a theme to the book, or an overarching sentiment to the book. But I usually don't know what that is until I've written the book. And then I'll read it. I'll read that first draft or the second draft, and I'll go, oh, okay, this is what I'm writing about. And then I'll go back in and look for ways to shore that up along the way. With Island of Thieves, Van is hired. Van's from a very blue-collar background. He was, he was in the Army as a sergeant for many years in the Army Rangers. Came from kind of hard scrabble life, was raised, somewhat outside the law. And he has a very combative relationship to people with money, whether they deserve it or not. He's very class conscious. And one of the aspects of the book that I try to underline as we're learning about these characters is, with money, without money, whatever, people come in all different types. There are people who use their wealth and power very effectively for good reasons, for the good of all. There are people who use wealth and power solely for their own benefit or to shore up what they believe, whether that's in the best interest of those around them or not, right? So I wouldn't necessarily say that's a theme of the book that, everyone has to be judged as individuals, but with Island of Thieves, it gave Van a chance to bump up with people on a, in the top 1% of the 1% and evaluate them as people rather than constructs.
Well, I noticed on your website that you go out and you do a little bit of field research. How much that factors into creating your characters?
As much as I can. I mean, the last couple of years it's been pretty limited, obviously, because of travel and COVID has made location scouting pretty hard. Now that we can travel a little more, it's a little better. But I do enjoy research a lot. I will tend to write the book first, or at least get the general idea of what it is I'm trying to achieve in a plot before I delve deep into the research. Island of Thieves, for example, edges on a particular aspect of chemical engineering and chemical innovation, which is a corporate innovation and secret that has a central thing in the plot. And I wanted this to be a real thing. I wanted this to be something that could actually exist today, that could be developed and subsequently stolen, if it were created. And so I started, and I had an idea for what I wanted it to be, but I didn't delve deep into the research until I had written out what the story was, until I'd written the story, because then I know how I needed that particular aspect, that particular innovation to work, right? And then I started doing homework into it to see if the real world fit what I needed it to do. And I did have to adjust a couple things, but for the most part, it allowed me to go to experts, people who had been in test labs and who were chemical engineers or biomedical engineers, and ask very specific questions, right? Like, how do you test this? What does this look like, right? What machine does this? So, and what that does is it allows me to describe it for the reader without drowning them in detail, right? It's just like, oh, this chemical innovation allows this to happen, and this is worth a massive amount of money because of this. Great. That's all we need to know, right?
Yeah. You don't want to get too bogged down in complications, otherwise it draws the person away from the story. I mean, I think, it's probably true. Now, when you look back at past crimes in 2015, did you ever go back and reread that book and kind of go, I did this, eh? I did that. And kind of go, because for me, I cringe at my first books because I think I've become a better writer, and I've learned from those first books. Each one that comes along, I feel like it's a little better put together. And so when I go back, sometimes I go, oh, geez, I wish I could redo this. Do you ever kind of get that urge, that feeling?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been thinking about rereading some of the older books, not just to look at the writing, but also because we've gotten to the point in the series where I need to start creating a character Bible,
right.
So I can remember exactly what the characters, he met were, what they drove, all of that sort of thing, where there's enough side characters now or one-off characters, or even recurring characters that I need to remember aspects of them without having to go back and hunt for those when I need them. So I've been thinking about rereading that, but I haven't done a lot of it yet for a couple of reasons. One is, I might wince at the things I'd rather change, as you mentioned. The other is even worse, which is, what if it's really, really good and I don't feel I'm writing at that level anymore? But fortunately, I don't think that's a problem, because I think I have improved with every book. I've certainly tried new tricks, as they were. Island of Thieves, for example, is the first one that is in third person. That's not solely from Van's point of view. Many of the books have interstitial chapters which show Van at a younger age. Past Crimes delves deeply into that, but also Hard Cold Winter, Every Day Above Ground. Those books also have interstitial chapters, and they might focus on just like one particular summer in young Van's life, or they might pop in at different points. And what those interstitial chapters do is they provide information for the current story that's going on, but they also reinforce some of the themes and emotional points that I'm trying to make in the book as well. So with every book, the new one being third person, that allows me to break away from Van's point of view to somebody else's, set up dangers that are coming at him that he doesn't know about, engendering suspense for the reader, all of those things that you can do in a thriller that you might not do in a mystery. And so by challenging myself like this, it's nerve-wracking, it's walking the tightrope, but I also think it's getting better and better as a writer and more engaging.
Yeah, it's certainly a different approach. Like it's harder to do it this way. How do you decide what point of view you're going to give on that third person? Yes.
How do I decide which character?
Yeah, which character is going to give that?
Yeah, usually it's the central character that's making a decision in that moment, right? And sometimes that's the antagonist, where you want to know what the villain is thinking and why, and show how smart they are and how dangerous they are, and what they're planning to do that will prove a danger for the good guys going forward. Sometimes it's just a side character, and those can be either just somebody on the outskirts who's just seeing the chaos happening, or it's a bit of comic relief to a certain extent, right? Where you'll get just one side character point of view. Without spoilers, there's one character in Island of Thieves that is just a side character. He's a sort of a henchman type. He's a member of a team that is after our hero. But he has a particular skill as a helicopter pilot. And so we have one very short chapter from his point of view as he's piloting the helicopter that is central to the big climactic scene. And I think that's kind of fun for the viewer or the reader, because as we're watching the chapters roll on, we've got into a rhythm of, okay, it's Van, it's the villain, it's this side character, and so forth. And we've got somebody brand new with his own stresses who's trying to deal with a bad situation and is going from bad to worse very quickly. And I think that can be very exciting. So it's you want to focus on the characters for whom something dramatic is happening, but also who are making key decisions about what's going to drive the story forward.
So Dr. Evil.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And then you have a little one from the point of view of Mini-Me, right?
Yeah.
Frau Farbissina. Yeah. You get this. Wouldn't it be fun to hear the thoughts in Frau Farbissina's head as she's in one of Dr. Evil's meetings? Yeah. That would be great.
Yeah. A lot of vagina.
Yes, exactly. There we go.
Oh, I'm in trouble. Anyway, wow. So, do you ever see yourself getting away from this type of writing, like the thriller sort of mystery?
I'm not sure. I really, the books that I still love to read, and the ones that I grew up reading are usually the ones where people are undergoing harrowing circumstances. They're generally fiction, sometimes real life survival or things like that. But often it's characters that are, having dramatic and sometimes terrible things happen to them. So I really love thrillers. Right now I'm deep into writing my first, standalone, thriller. Again, third person, multiple viewpoint, but it's the same sort of idea. It's the idea of, only in this case, it's ordinary people in terrible circumstances for the most part, whereas you wouldn't call Van an ordinary cat by any means. But I like the idea of, boy, what's the toughest days in people's lives, and how will they come through it? That's always a fascinating question.
Breaking a nail.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. If you're a member of the ultra wealthy. Maybe breaking a nail is it. Although I kind of like the idea of, the idea that breaking a nail is at the exact wrong point, right? What if it's the straw? What if it's the nail that broke the camel's back in sense, right? The last thing they can handle at that moment.
Well, all things being equal, do you prefer to write a standalone novel, or do you prefer to write a series?
Series has some advantages, which is that once your world is established, especially since it's in the contemporary world, you can simply revisit that, right? And after with half a dozen Van books to date, I've gotten very skilled at reintroducing characters and Van himself for newer readers without having to spend a lot of time, right? And we can jump right into the story, and that's great. With the standalone, of course, I've got to introduce these characters for the very first time, which is a little different, and make sure that their viewpoints are distinct and different as well. The advantage of the standalone for me, and I think for readers as well, is with the series character, the series character is going to survive, right? Might be tough, but you know that intellectually going in. You don't necessarily know that with a standalone. So a standalone can be a lot scarier for the reader, and I think that's a good thing.
Publishing world, how do you like it now, and what do you think of it with Amazon and everything else going on, and everybody and their dog can do a book now? Well, I'm very honest about that, because I think personally I wanted to go through publishers to begin with, and I did. And I found it to be very important, even though it wasn't always a great experience, but I think it's important. And but people nowadays will just write something and publish it. So
yeah,
how do you feel about this changing world?
In general, I would say more ways to get to readers, and for readers to have books available to them, the better, right? That's the overall need. And that's setting aside, of course, Amazon as the monolithic entity it is. It's both enabled people to get hold of books and see books that they might not otherwise see, but then the profits to the author have gone way, way down because the prices are cut all the way over the board, making it tough for publishers as well. At the same time, self-publishing has allowed the traditional gatekeepers to not be the only ones who have a road to getting works out there, right? I will say for me, I wanted to be traditionally published and pursued that route and always had that in mind. It was in the back of my head of that, well, if nobody wants this, or if I can't sell it within a reasonable amount of time, maybe I'll publish it myself. And so that was always an option I was open to. And for a lot of people, self-publishing is just the way to go. That's just the way, they're producing a lot of work, or it's not something that a traditional publisher would be interested in. And it's a way for them to get that out there. Personally, I'm very glad that I'm traditionally published, because the main advantage of it, besides the obvious of visibility and everything else, it gives me access to real experts, right? I've got my agent's input. I've got my editor's input. Sometimes that's plural if it's published in more than one place. I've got input from copy editors. These are all very, very knowledgeable people that are giving me notes and thoughts about what works and what doesn't in the narrative, right? That to me is the biggest advantage in traditional publishing, is that now you're part of a team, and that team is focused on making your book hopefully the best it can be in the time you have available, right? And so that to me has been invaluable. My books have benefited tremendously from the input of my agent and my editor. And so that's why going forward, let's say things change in 10 years and the doors to traditional publishing close for whatever reason. If I were to pursue self-publishing and I had to go that route, had no other choice, I would still be trying to set up that same structure somehow of having a team of very knowledgeable readers working together to try to craft their individual books.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's the most important part of the process is the people that are editing and being your input people, your readers, your supporters in that sense. Because myself, I've always been very insecure, even though I had things published in that. But even now, when I do self-publishing, I have most of the same people doing the same jobs, just whether I pay them or a publisher does.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to overstate how invaluable it is to have other eyeballs and educated eyeballs on your work, right? It just a tremendous benefit.
Oh yeah. Well, that's what and when you're doing a series, like when you're doing that must be. I would think that's complicated in the sense of remembering what someone did in book 2, and you're writing book 6, and then because you can't error just even a slight bit, because that reader will catch it, and then they'll say, oh, he had a green truck in book 2 and now it's blue,
right? Right.
And they'll call you out, and they'll call you out all over the place. You'll be on Twitter.
Yep.
They'll be TikToking you.
And I will say, congratulations, you won the prize. You found the hidden gotcha.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
then you track them down and have them shot.
Yeah, good job. No, not at all. Not at all. But what that means is they care, right? They give a damn about what's going on, and that's wonderful. If someone's reading my books so closely that they notice things like that, and for example, in the fourth book, I made a very basic mistake about Ireland. And I visited Ireland a few times, and Van's grandfather is from Belfast originally in it. And I had a mention of the police, and without thinking, I called the police the Garda. But of course, the Garda are not the police in Northern Ireland. They're the police in the Republic.
Right.
And of course, readers called me out on that, and I went, "Yep, you are absolutely right. I got that wrong." And that's great. Thank you for reading so closely that you caught that. And then we could fix it in later editions, right?
Yeah.
But it is that sort of thing where I look at it as a compliment if somebody's reading that close. And, hey, mistakes happen. If you're writing a 100,000-word book and you're writing it on deadline, every once in a while there's going to be a mistake that you just don't catch, and the copy editors don't catch either, right?
Yeah. It's like the water bottle in Game of Thrones.
Right, exactly. Yes, the Starbucks cup or whatever it was. Yeah, exactly.
It's like, well, they had Starbucks back then. Come on.
Yeah.
Drag drive-through.
Right.
If someone has never heard of you, which I don't understand how that could be. Right. I mean, and you were given an opportunity to give one book to one person, and they were to say, which book would you give them of all of your books right now? Which would be the one you'd want them to read to kind of get the flavor of who Glen Erik Hamilton is?
That's always a tough question, right? Do I start them at the start of the series, or do I start them at the latest of the series, which I hope will always be the best written, right? The most interesting along the way.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna caveat this a little bit. For the first person Van, I might argue that the fourth book in the series, Mercy River, is a really good one, because it not only deals with Van himself, but in that he's attending a large and raucous reunion of former and current Army Rangers that essentially takes over a small Oregon town for one weekend. And you get a sense of not only who he is as a person, but who he had to be as a soldier, and his struggles with becoming a civilian afterwards, unexpectedly. So Mercy River is one that's dear to my heart. It's also dear to my heart because my daughter and I got to take a trip and location scout in Central Oregon in the high plains there. which was a wonderful time, looking over all the ghost towns and abandoned barns and other things in that region. So Mercy River is a really good one for first person Van. The latest one, Island of Thieves, I'm really proud of, not only because it's the first, it's in third person, and that gives you other characters' views on Van, right? You're seeing him through other characters' eyes, and they're assessing him in ways that the reader might not have considered him before. And I think that's kind of fascinating for learning the character as well.
How do I say this? Who is Van? Sorry, I was going to say Van Diesel. Who is
Vin Diesel?
Yeah, who is Van Shaw? Like, how would you describe that character?
Van is a guy I often describe him as he's an expert at survival and a rookie at living. He was raised by his grandfather, who was a career criminal, a burglar and a thief and an armed robber in his younger, wilder days. So he was raised with a very skewed moral compass. But there was always a part of him that didn't feel right with that life. And he and his grandfather had a falling out when Van was just newly out of high school. And Van escaped into the military. And to his surprise, found that he flourished in that environment. That because he was disciplined and focused and very expert at being a young thief, and the lessons that his grandfather had instilled, the discipline that his grandfather had instilled, he took to it like a duck to water and wound up in the Army Rangers, direct action, light infantry, and found a home there, and eventually advanced to sergeant first class and was active in Iraq and Afghanistan, and really was the light to the dark in terms of his upbringing, right? Where you're suddenly in an environment that requires, strict adherence to a code and support of those around you. You're not just out for yourself; you're protecting those around you as well. But there was parts of the old Van still in him. And he has to, in the first book, no real spoilers here, he has to deal with unfinished business back home. And that puts him into conflict not only with the people back home, but also with the Army itself. And now he's a guy stuck between the two parts of his personality. He is extremely effective as an individual. He's an expert thief. He's an expert soldier. Tactically, he knows exactly what he's doing. But in leading a strategic life, he never expected necessarily to be out of the Army or to have lived as long as he's lived. He had that sort of samurai mindset of like, this mission might be the last one, right? And he had accepted that in his head. And so to find himself a civilian on the streets again is a very different thing. Also, his particular skills are not very socially acceptable skills, right? Safe cracking and boosting cars and greasing security systems is not the sort of thing that can get you a legit job in a lot of different ways, but he's not willing to steal from people anymore either. So, he is a man caught between and making his way as best he can. And he's also prone to trouble. He is attracted to it in a lot of ways. He likes the action. He likes the thrill. And he knows that very well. He knows he's at his best when he's under pressure. And there's a part of him that seeks that out.
Wow. So you got all this from your life, of course.
Yes. Yeah. I'm fighting off ninjas as we speak. There's a lot of, obviously Van and my backgrounds couldn't be farther apart, but our attitudes about things are very similar. And I will steal aspects of my own background for Van, aspects of being in high school, of being an athlete, of enjoying, boxing gyms and things like that, which Van also enjoys, working out there. just, I'll steal little snippets, but obviously, some of Van's mindset also comes from my interviewing, veterans, current and past, of our recent wars, and checking certain aspects of Van's thinking, not just the tactical thinking in the situation, but also his attitudes against what is sensible for a modern soldier or a recent former soldier of 29, 30 years old, right? Am I thinking with that right mindset? And so some of that I give credit to them as well.
So you go out and boost cars.
Yeah. Well, that I would do anyway, even if I wasn't writing about it. I mean, come on.
What point would there? Hey, actually,
I have to say, researching ways to do things like that is a big part of the fun of the job. To a certain extent. It's like, yeah, there are a few things. I wouldn't say I have the skill to boost a modern car with its security systems or anything like that. But there are certain things that's just like, that could just come in handy.
Well, yeah. That's but I wonder, because when you talk attitudes, you're talking about his military and background and things. In today's world, do you have to be careful on how you phrase things? And I mean that more of a political way, because there's so much BS all over the place right now,
Yeah,
and it really kind of defines people nowadays when it shouldn't. All of a sudden you say or do the wrong thing in your book, and it's like, oh, he's just another libtard, or he's just this or that, or he might,
right,
or know, or if your guy's too redneck, let's say, or something. But do you have to be careful on how they interact and what words you use, descriptions?
Well, sometimes, it's funny when I've talked with soldiers and Marines and others who are current, they'll certainly have personal political views about things, but ultimately, when it comes to war, it's about supporting the men and women who are with them, right? It's about looking out for the one standing shoulder to shoulder to you, watching somebody else's sins. It's about looking after your brothers and sisters in arms and trying to make a difference, if you can, for the people whom you are protecting, both military and, so I always start from that. As I said, there's people that will assume that because Van is from Seattle, because he has worked part-time as a bouncer in a bar that's that's a very inclusive bar in terms of the LGBTQ and the queer community, and he's in Capitol Hill, which is the heart of that in Seattle, that people will assume that, we'll call him a social justice warrior, so forth, right, and assume that he's extremely liberal. But he was also a professional soldier for 10 years. And so he can sometimes be very hawkish about things like violence when he feels that is necessary. And those aren't, I think those are things that are true to the character. They're not necessarily political in his bent. Van has, and I have too, a fair distrust of people in power, regardless of what their political viewpoints are, right? The fact that they've sought out power tends to tends to have him question their motives, right? About whether or not they're really standing up for the little guy or whether they're out for themselves. And I think that if anything, that sort of cynicism or pragmatism about politics comes into play for him as much as me, right? You're always wondering, okay, prove that you're not just out for yourself, and then we'll start considering whether or not we should get your vote, right?
Yeah. It's always tough, but hey, here we are.
Yep.
Now, so you like interacting with your readers, or somewhat, or?
Oh yeah, very much. I'll get a few emails each week from fans and readers, and some folks reach out on Twitter or Facebook or whatnot. But yeah, I enjoy interacting with readers quite a bit. I especially enjoy going to hopefully those are becoming a thing again, mystery conventions. I'll go to Left Coast Crime here, as the name describes. That's here on the western states primarily, west of the Mississippi and west of the Rockies, depending upon how they define it that particular year. But so Left Coast Crime is a common one for me to be at. I'm a Thriller Fest baby. Thriller Fest is a convention for thriller writers. It's in New York. It's where I found my agent back in 2013. And so, I'm a big fan of Thriller Fest and try to get to New York whenever we can. Hopefully that will be in person again this year. And BoucherCon, which is the biggest mystery convention in the U.S. and perhaps the world. That's an annual gathering, which this year will be in Minneapolis, I think I'm remembering correctly. And so I try to get to mystery conventions, not only because they're a lot of fun personally, but also because it's a chance where you get to talk to a lot of fans and a lot of potential new readers and talk just about the stuff we all love. We talk about writing. We talk about other authors we love, all of that sort of stuff. And, those are the best times. It's been really tough the last 2 years with COVID and having so many of these conventions be either canceled outright or virtual only, where you might listen to a panel, but it's a lot like going to a meeting, right? You're not interacting quite as much as you would. So now that we're coming out of this, we hope, once we get past Omicron and we can get to these conventions again, I'm really looking forward to that interaction because that's a recharging of the battery so many of us have not had in so long that I think we're all just craving it.
Well, yeah, good luck. Hopefully it does. I'm not holding my breath, right? Not being negative, but gee, So, what's your website so people can come find you?
Yeah, it is my name, Glen Erik Hamilton, Glen with one N, Erik with a K.com. That's usually an easy way to tell what's going on. I'll try to keep posts about events and upcoming things there when there are events, and whether there's a book launch or something like that going on. Twitter is also an easy way to get a hold of me at Glen Erik H. And I have a Facebook page as well. So, if folks are readers of my works or others and want to talk mysteries, reach on out.
Yeah. Oh, okay. We'll have that up on our website, and people can find you that way if they don't remember. I don't know how they wouldn't have it anyway already saved, but it's just in case. So really appreciate it. Who's your favorite writer?
Oh, that's a loaded question. My favorite writer. Okay, I'm going to go back a little ways. Part of the genesis of Van was the books of John D. McDonnell and the Travis McGee series. And McGee is John D. McDonnell wrote 21 books in the series. McGee is what he calls a salvage consultant, which is recovering things for people. And sometimes that could be money or jewel or lost reputation, things like that. McGee, works on the outskirts of the law. He's a good guy, but he's not an untarnished guy. There's a lot of the genesis of Van in the books of John D. McDonnell, certainly. When I'm looking more modern thrillers, I like the works of Lee Child and Michael Connelly and Karen Slaughter. Nick Petrie is another one who writes along the same lines I do, of a veteran making his way. There's so many really good authors nowadays, both bestsellers and not, that it's just sort of a golden time for people to enjoy this sort of thriller fiction.
Don't forget me.
Absolutely. How can I forget that?
Well, on the same vein, I was just wondering if you have any influences that might be surprising to your fans.
Oh, well, it's funny. I'm going to name one in particular, Jane Austen. And it's funny to say that because I'm not only I'm a fan of her writing, and I also enjoy films and stuff made out of her stuff. But one of the things that's always interesting about Austen is her use of dialogue and language for people implying things that they can't say outright. And it's a lovely aspect of her writing. You know, so when I'm going back, when I'm reading the classics, there's a part of me that always enjoys, you know, watching how she gets characters to imply things that they wouldn't necessarily state in their circumstances.
Interesting.
Well, there you have it.
Yeah.
And me.
Yeah.
Well, it's been an interesting conversation, and we thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Lovely to talk to you guys.
Our guest, Glen Erik Hamilton, and thank you for being here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glen.
Tired of wasting time trying to decide what to watch on your streaming service? Go to our website and look for the Martino movie reviews.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.